I am a prime advocate against the death penalty. The reason I say that is because the death penalty basically is not punishment, it's murder, basically. And also, it's unfairly meted out against people of color versus white people. And in a lot of the cases, the prosecutions that have occurred have either been tainted or just straight out biased against the black or minority defendants in order for these prosecutors basically to build up their records because they have political aspirations. So this particular segment from News One Now is going to outline some, and I say some, of the issues that I have, but not all.
Because you're black, you need to die. And I felt that was strange because the lawyer didn't say that, and nobody else, the prosecutor or the judge, and nobody did. It's like it was an everyday thing in the court.
Folks, that is the voice of convicted killer Dwayne Buck talking about the shocking testimony that was used to sway jurors in his Houston case, sentencing him to death. He's now hoping that biased testimony will save his life when the Supreme Court considers whether to hear his appeal next Friday. Here's the story. Dwayne Buck was sentenced to die for the 1995 shooting deaths of his ex-girlfriend and her friend. He also shot his sister, but she survived. Buck's appeal centers on the testimony from a psychologist who was called as an expert witness. Under cross-examination, he said Buck was more likely to be dangerous in the future because he was black. Buck's case is shedding light on racial bias in the death penalty and is now featured in a video by the NAACP Legal Defense and Education Fund titled A Broken Promise, and they point out several key facts. At the time of Buck's trial, Harris County prosecutors were 3 times more likely to seek the death penalty for black defendants. Also, Harris County juries were twice as likely to sentence black defendants to death. And in recent times, over the last 5 years, nearly 75% of all death sentences in Texas were given to people of color, and the majority of those sentences, because I'm from there, were given in Harris County. Christina Swarms, Buck's attorney and the litigation director for the NAACP Legal Defense and Education Fund, is featured in the video. She joins me now via FaceTime from Houston. This is stunning. We did this story, and I remember it vividly, where you hear this, where literally they said, because he's black, he's more likely he's going to be a criminal for the rest of his life. That is amazing.
It really is amazing testimony. You know, this is not one of the cases where the evidence is subtle, where the suggestion of racial discrimination is implicit. You know, this is one of the rare cases where we have absolutely explicit, unquestioned, undisputed evidence of racial discrimination and stereotype presented to a jury. The state doesn't dispute this. No one is arguing about whether or not this was actually what was presented in this trial. It was what was presented. The only question is what we're going to do about it.
So I'm trying to understand here. Is Dwayne saying that he's innocent, or is he saying because of the comments he should not have been sentenced to death?
Yeah, no, Mr. Buck is not questioning or is not fighting his conviction. He admits that he, is guilty of the crime for which he was tried and convicted. The only question right now is whether or not he should be executed after an expert told a jury that he was more likely to be dangerous because he's black, as opposed to having the opportunity to have a fair jury decide his sentence without being influenced by racist testimony.
Angela?
Sure. I think one of the most jarring statistics that was put up was the 75% of the people of color who are overwhelmingly sentenced to death. So my question for you is, are you all working on other cases to establish this very clear pattern and the precedent set there, or is this the only case you all are working on right now?
No, we work on death penalty cases, all the time, and so we certainly are using this case in Harris County. Well, this is the second Harris County case that we've worked on that addressed exactly these issues. The first one was we represented a Mexican American gentleman, where there was racial discrimination in jury selection, and a lot of actually the evidence that we used in this case also, came from that case as well. So certainly we are dedicated to looking at the problem of racial discrimination in Harris County, because the statistics in Harris County are so stark.
Right.
Since 1994, the only people that have been sentenced to death in Harris County are Black and Latino. So
Wow.
there's clearly a real problem of racial discrimination in the administration of the death penalty in Harris County.
Paris Denard.
I know that then Attorney General, who happens to be a Republican, John Cornyn, who's now the U.S. Senator, did an audit when he was AG and found there were 7 other cases where this specific doctor's testimony was used, this inflammatory testimony was used to convict Black men to prison. And so the question is, has there been any other examples of not just this doctor, but other doctors using this type of false logic to then lead to convictions unfairly to Black individuals?
For a while, Dr. Quijano, who was the expert in this case, sort of had a cottage industry in Texas where he was testifying a lot in these cases. And as you've indicated, there were a series of them that John Cornyn promised, admitted constitutional error and promised that he would make sure that all of the folks who had this racist testimony presented in their cases got new fair sentencings. And Mr. Buck is the only one of those cases that did not get a new fair sentencing.
Now, I'll say this. When they called this doctor to testify, they knew exactly what they were going to get. And for him to be called as many times as he was called in these cases obviously is a pattern. And they obviously were attempting to influence the jury, which is what a witness's testimony is supposed to do. But I mean, this is ridiculous, and I will have to say that Senator Cornyn, he recognized the problem and did something about it. Now, this one guy, obviously, he's caught up in this, and I hope that he's successful.
Texas lived up to its promise in all of the other cases that John Cornyn identified, and they just did an absolute reverse course in Mr. Buck's case without explanation, and now he is facing a real chance of execution.
And so if the Supreme Court does not take this up next week, the lower court ruling stands and he'll be executed?
If nothing happens, exactly, we are now at the point of having to make the district attorney will have to make a decision about what she's going to do. There will not be appeals pending in the courts, and so he faces a very real chance of an execution date.
All right, then. We certainly appreciate it. Thank you so very much, and we'll stay on top of this case.
Thank you so much.
All right, so number one, let's start at the bottom. Black people, you need to do your duty, and when you get that jury duty summons, you need to answer that summons and serve. Because if you don't, then you're going to allow majority, if not complete, white juries to sit in judgment of our people. So even though we're a small percentage of the population, but it has been shown that anytime there are at least 2 black members of juries, that sentences are much more fair and decisions are much more fair than when you only have 1 black jurist and obviously when you have no black jurists. Number 2, we need to address the system of people selected to serve on jury duty. I can tell you for a fact, in California, they don't just go off of your voter registrations, which a lot of places do. They have lists of companies that pay for jury duty, okay? So they like to primarily draw from those lists so that they know that the person won't have a quote-unquote financial hardship. But the majority of the companies that pay for jury duty are large companies that are overwhelmingly white in the makeup of their employees. So we need to look at that as far as the pool that they send the jury duty summonses out to. Okay? And number three, we need to really make an aggressive push to end the death penalty. Because again, death penalties, and as Roland mentioned, in Harris County are pretty much exclusively used when dealing with minority defendants. So this is something that we really need to pay attention to, and your comments are welcomed.